Welcome back to the Football Out West show, live on Facebook here. Craig, our next guest, mate, they don't come bigger than this gentleman. He's arguably scored the most famous goal in Australian football history, and it was probably more to the point, it was something that he was involved in very, very recently on Optus Sport that has really turned the wheels of change in Australian football. And it is an absolute pleasure to have this gentleman on.
It is, and just before we do get on there, I think it'll be remiss of me to say there that it's probably not the best goal ever in history, Tonch, but it's certainly probably the most important goal in Australia's soccer history. So at least, I would imagine that John would like it to be the best goal in history, but I'm sure it's not. But look, we're really glad and thankful for giving up his time this evening to come on the show, and we welcome John Aloisì.
Thanks, guys.
That means that if John Aloisì...
Well, as you can see, there's some footage. Just sit back and take in one of the most historic nights of Australian football.
Are you sure? I'm trying to do my maths.
4-2.
I can hardly...
4-2.
I can
He
hardly
wins it for us. John.
Here's Aloisì for a place in the World Cup.
For us.
He scored! Australia have done it!
John! Come on!
John Aloisì, the Confederations Cup hero, has done it in the biggest game of all.
Come on, Australia! Johnny won!
At last, at long last, 31 years, 4 months and 24 days have passed since Australia ended its campaign at the 74 World Cup. And now, finally, belatedly, wonderfully and joyfully, Australia is back on the biggest stage.
And we're also back as well. And I tell you what, I can never tire of watching that footage. And I'm sure our special guest tonight is in much the same vein. Very, very warm welcome to you, John Aloisì. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. And just to let all the listeners out there know, I did not tell you to put that on, okay? You're not saying I said, why not?
Hey.
I don't mind listening to it or seeing it again.
Listen, I remember that back from the UK, John, and I obviously remember you playing back in the days for Portsmouth, Coventry, and I think that's the fastest I think I've ever seen you run when you took your shirt off.
I get a lot of people saying they've never seen me run so much and so fast. And,
Very good.
It was an unbelievable moment, of course, but it was just for everyone in general because, you know, like Simon Hill commentating there, we're back on the biggest stage of all, the World Cup, and for a lot of us, it was our final opportunity, and more so for every football lover and everyone that followed the Socceroos. It's a long time coming, and we had some great sides that just missed out, and we were fortunate to be involved in the side that got there, and not only we got there, we actually performed really well at the World Cup, so it was a pleasure to be part of that squad.
John, on the night, obviously the jubilation, the celebration, no one knew what was going to happen afterwards, or to the extent that history would be made. But in that joy, in that jubilation, in that celebration, was your mind just fixed on that night then, or was already thoughts of playing at the World Cup on the greatest stage on earth? Was that entering your mind at that point in time?
Not at that point in time, because of course it was a dream of mine and all the other players to play at the World Cup, and watch World Cup, and we'd actually never seen Australia there because a lot of us weren't born in '74, so it was it was something that was always in our minds to finally get to play in the World Cup. But in that moment there, and this goes back to my childhood, I would practice in the backyard with my brother Ross, and we were football lovers, and we had a passion for the game, and it didn't matter, what Adelaide City supporters, but I remember Chris Calancho scoring an important goal for Sydney Olympic, and he took off his top and ran around the pitch like a madman, and I was doing that in the backyard, and I think all those emotions come out, and that's probably the reason why I took off my top. So it wasn't planned, but it was something that, I'm sure that everyone in that stadium that was watching had the same emotion as what we did out there.
Yeah, and it was something else, and I know just seeing the pictures again there, it'll just remind everybody again this evening of how important soccer is or football soccer is here in Australia. And we're just looking here on the group that actually got you when you got to the World Cup, what actually greeted you in the World Cup. So I think Brazil, Australia, Croatia, and Japan. That's some group.
Yeah, it was a tough group, and we knew it was going to be tough because Japan were, probably the best team in Asia. They had some quality players. They had a really good side, so we knew that was going to be tough. We didn't know a lot about them back then because we weren't in the Asian Confederation. The first game, Brazil just crept past Croatia 1-0. We knew that Croatia was very strong. They were one of the toughest European nations going around at that time. And Brazil were reigning world champions. So we knew that we were up against it, but we had a belief that we could actually match it against anyone. We got through a tough group, and then everyone knows what happened against Italy. We took the world champions, the eventual world champions, right to the wire, and disappointed that we ended up losing that game. But it just shows that how strong our side was and the players that we had back then that were playing at a very high level. And this is why I think you got me on the show. How do we start producing those sorts of players again? And we had that discussion the other night on Optus Sport. It was a Zoom sort of chat discussion, and you see that the players that we had on, and all of them from that World Cup, are still as passionate about the game as what they were back then when they were playing the game. And just recently, a group of us have got on a group chat, and we're trying to organise a group called the Golden Generation that can discuss these issues that we're having, and not only issues, how do we take the game forward? And I haven't spoken to Lucas Mill for a long time, and Lucas is now involved, and we've got the other boys that were on the other night, plus Darren Burgess, Vilko Callis, Ron Smith is also involved, who was heavily involved in our upbringing in terms of the AIS, and we're just getting together. How can we help the game?
Now, John, we've got the still from that Optus Zoom in question, where we've got Josip Skoko, Craig Moore, who was also a guest on our show about 3 weeks ago, Mark Schwarzer, Vince Grella, and Mark Viduka, of course. Yeah. On the night, and it's interesting that you were involved with that historic penalty kick against Uruguay and set the wheels in motion for an historic transformation of Australian football. In many ways, that Zoom roundtable that night, which was riveting viewing, by the way, had set the wheels in motion for quite a revolutionary change, or we hope it will be, in Australian football. And since then, Football Federation Australia have come up with a starting 11, as they're calling it, a think tank consisting of some of the highest names in Australian football, both from the men's and women's. Mate, could this be a focal point in the transformation of Australian football, in your eyes?
Well, that's what we're hoping for, because we know as a group we're much more powerful in our messaging and our voice, and as individuals it's a lot harder to actually create that wave and that talk about. You saw the other night, it was mainly just us discussing and showing how passionate we are about the game, and we had no idea the risk that it was. And we had no idea that everyone was thinking the same way as us. We're just saying this is what we feel, and it's great to hear that the majority of football lovers and followers out there are feeling the same way. And what the FFA has done in putting the starting 11 together is great. There's a lot of knowledge in that room, in that starting 11. Let's hope that they listen. Because that will be, obviously the important part. Let's hope that there's they're open to not just, what we can do at grassroots level. I think even, in terms of the A-League, because we know at the moment, this is a moment that we can actually try and restructure these things, because where the A-League is at a crossroads. We know that. There's a lot of clubs that have done a lot of good things in the A-League. But, I think now it's time to actually get clubs that have been around for 60 odd years and get them involved and try and create something that has got the whole of football together. And we're united as one, because at the moment it's too fragmented. We spoke the other night about our governance, and we know that that's a bit fragmented, but it also just in terms of our grassroots to the top is very disjointed. So let's hope that we can actually do something about it.
Looks like we've lost Craig there. Hello, Craig.
Very sorry, guys. I muted myself so I wouldn't get into interference. Sorry.
It was your fault. It wasn't my fault. There you go.
Yeah, my fault. Look, I think in a perverse kind of way, the COVID-19 crisis that's come out is going to hopefully be a bit of a godsend to football, because it will allow, or should allow, us to start thinking about, what change. You just brought up there the A-League, and I'm in total agreement. I think it is at a crossroads, John. I think maybe it's now becoming a little dour and a little bit damp, and probably time for a bit of a change in how it operates and what it does. But more so for me, it's about how do we generate the next generation of 2006 Australian footballers? That's the key for me, because I see some very, very good talented players in the A-League, and I see some fantastic young talented players, whether it's playing for the Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City, or whether it's playing locally in NPL football. How do we get these talented youngsters into some kind of system that allows them to be playing against the best week in, week out, and allow them to develop the same way as you guys did with Ron Smith at the AIS?
Yeah, I agree with you that, eventually it should be that the best are playing against the best, and there's no scores that are sort of blown out. And I think that in Victoria, you've actually just started a new system. I think it's gone for a year now in terms of first you're playing with zones, and then we go to another level, and then eventually it's the best against the best, which, I think it's a good idea. I heard that it worked pretty well this season. My issue about it is that, it should be something that's very similar all over Australia, that we should all be on the same page and pushing, because the important years are definitely between 12 and 16 in terms of playing enough football games, having enough quality training sessions. We all know the issues in terms of the infrastructure, and you coach at grassroots level at clubs, and you know that the facilities are okay, but there's not enough pitches, for the amount of kids that are playing. So, what can we do about that? Instead of training on a quarter of a pitch or a half a pitch, how can we end up that the kids are training on a full pitch? What can we do in terms of getting government funding? How can the government help in putting sort of outdoor football courts like they've got in certain countries that kids can just go kick the ball around every day and all day? How can we reconnect our grassroots with the A-League? Now, at the moment, the A-League is actually there's only 20 or less than 20% of grassroots football that really connect with the A-League. Now, how can we grow that? Now, I believe that we need to align ourselves all together in terms of A-League align the NPL. I'm a big believer in actually making, or let's have a first and second division, A-League, B-League, whatever you want to call it. Let's give the opportunity to the clubs that have been around for 60 odd years of actually rejoining the top level. And I think that's a way of actually grabbing everyone's attention and also reconnecting with grassroots football, because we all know there's some clubs that have done an amazing job in the A-League, but the connection's still not there with a lot of clubs. I think reconnecting with the past is a good thing.
Now, on Tuesday night on our sister program, the Geelong Region Soccer Show, ex-Croatian international Joey Didlitzer was really praising the new NPL Junior structure in Victoria. And Craig, you're heavily involved both at North Geelong, where Joey's involved, and in the NPL Junior structure. And one of the things that Joey was very adamant about this new structure is that it is creating a similar to what they used to have back in the day, a Super League structure where the best kids were playing against the best in the state. John, what's your take on creating, I guess, probably competitions that currently don't exist with the A-League? So whether it's a hybrid national youth league being played in the summer that provides the best 16 to 20-year-olds in Australia with top quality competition. Do we need to now start thinking outside the square, or maybe even, as you said, returning back to what was once upon a time a winning formula? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, times have obviously changed, but you have to, keep up with times. You can't just go back, and say, yeah, just work in the NFL, because the old NFL had its own issues. So we have to look at what works with that and what works with the A-League, and actually looking that we can actually do something and restructure it. With what Joey's saying with the NPL, that's what I was meaning before, that, what ends up happening is that you end up having great competition, that they end up having also a selection process that the kids end up playing at the best. You end up selecting state teams. You could end up having zonal areas that have these summer youth leagues, and then all of a sudden, instead of playing 30 games, you might be playing 40 games this year, or a little bit more. And also, you're actually getting selected for something in terms of your zone. Or you're getting extra training sessions, better players, not at club level, and then all of a sudden you get selected for a state team, and then you go to national. I think that works really well, because you've got something to strive for. You're proud to represent the state, and then from there, the talent ID is a lot easier, because getting the best players all in one area.
Very good point. Very good point, Craig.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, John, because I've written down one of the things to speak about was that, and I am involved within the NPL structure down at North Geelong, as Tonchi said, and I'm involved with the under-16s. And for me, Football Victoria this year have done something different, where they've actually gone out and given kids more opportunities to play football, which means more time for the coaches to be involved with the players, which means more time on the field coaching them, which is fantastic. And I think all up, it's 33 games. And how you've got it down in Victoria, as you probably know, John, is you've got effectively 3 leagues. You've got the teams that do very well and win their games are playing in League One, then your mid-table, and then your bottom table. But the reality is, you're in those leagues based on your performances and based on the team that you're in and the level that you're at. And I think that's really good for football, because you will then get your top 6 teams, which are in the first division, which would effectively be the better players all playing against each other on a regular basis, which can only be good for development purposes, rather than playing somebody who's in the bottom league winning 13-0 and actually nobody wins out of that. But I think, from that, could there be an opportunity then? And you may have touched it. It was a bit of a dodgy line, but you may have touched it, where I think then you play your 33 leagues, 33 games, so your 11 qualification games, then your 22 league games. And then what you do is you're getting clubs involved, and it could be the coaches from each club nominate a particular player from a game that you've played. They then go into what I would see as an NPL Victoria rep team at that particular age group. So you might have 20 players of what I see the best players in those teams in a rep team. They go away for a camp somewhere. It could be in Victoria for a few weeks and train. And then there's a national competition where you've got Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, South Australia, all in one. So it's a little bit like the nationals that they have now, but in a better format for me. Would that work? Is that something that maybe we could consider, we could look at?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's something definitely to consider. And this is, I like Victoria is probably not as big as a state as Queensland in terms of the size. So, it might work differently in certain states, but it should still be of a similar model. And this is where we're saying that if you've got one governor, it's easier to implement through the whole of Australia. And I think that way there, that you're getting your quality games in and a lot of quality football. And also, you'll actually end up, and we had nationals that we represented our state, and we couldn't wait to play against Victoria. And I grew up in South Australia, and our rivalry was against Victoria. New South Wales always had a strong team, the WA, and it meant something. I love the idea of, you get promoted, relegated, if you want to say, that the best teams are in NPL 1, then the levels go down. It gives you something to strive for. If you want to get promoted, if you want to play against the best. And that way there, you're not only your individual players, but your teams and your coaches are trying to improve. And I think that if we see after a year or two, and even 3 years, if it's not working, then try something different. I don't think you have to stick to something if it's not working. But at the moment, I'm hearing good feedback from the NPL in Victoria, and so it seems like that it is working, and that's something that we should keep on rolling out.
Yeah, look, it is working, John, and I think they've split the league into 3 this year. So you got an MPL, LPL 1, MPL 2, but it also has its downside because there's only 22 games. So you've got senior players only playing 22 games a season. So again, that can't be good for the development. So you've got the juniors up to age from 13 to 16s playing 33 games, but you've got the seniors only playing 22. So there's a real mishmatch of what's important, because at the end of the day, even the under 20s and the under 18s will only be playing 22 games. That can't be good for football.
No, that's not good. I think, especially when you start to get to that top level, and you're talking about NPL, even A-League, I think that it's not enough games when you're talking about 22. I think that it should be at least between 30 and 40 games, and that's why I'm saying, with the restructure of the A-League, you can actually restructure the NPL setup, because NPL juniors, between a certain age, it looks like they're getting that right. They're still at senior level, and in say 17, 18, we still haven't got that right yet. And I think by having an A-League and then even a B-League with current NPL being involved in, and you can have a Northern Division, Southern Division, eventually promotion relegation from that, and then you could even have a third tier, which are the NPL clubs that don't want to actually get promoted, that they just want to keep on running their football clubs and play in the third tier, more in a regional area. So get more games in. The more games with the better quality of players you're going to start to produce.
Now, John, you touched on before that, Queensland being such a big state compared to some of the other states, and Australia as a whole is a massive, massive country. And I guess you've had first-hand experience when you're coaching up at Brisbane Roar. That distance, the cost factor, because a lot of critics of the B League or the second-tier competition are saying precisely that the issue here would be the cost factor. In your opinion, is that, I mean, obviously money is always going to be a problem, but to what extent would that be a inhibiting factor in developing a second-tier national competition?
Yeah, it's definitely a factor, because a lot of clubs say it's not viable for them to actually run a second tier. Now, this is where you need to have, obviously, sponsorship dollars, get clubs working to a level that is generating enough money, and they're able to sustain their football club in terms of income. And I think with this anyway, with the virus, it's been a leveler with A-League and NPL clubs, because a lot of A-League clubs have lost a lot of money. They're talking about salaries going down and whatever else. But I feel that if you create a northern and southern division, and then you say a promotion, relegation, and whatever else, if you package it really well, then you can actually take it to a broadcaster that we might be interested in that. Because at the moment, if you go to a broadcaster, if Fox do pull out, which everyone's saying that they probably will, If you just go with the A-League, I don't think there's going to be money involved. But if you go with an A-League and a second tier that that can cover most of Australia, all of a sudden there will be money that they might be interested, and they'll generate money. And we'll be the only code that would have that, because every other code in Australia don't have that. So we've got a point of difference. So it's the way that you can package it, the way that you can present it to broadcasters, and it's the way that you can deliver it. Because at the end of the day, what we need to deliver is a good product. And at the moment, our product's not good enough for broadcasters to be interested in.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the second tier with promotion and relegation, John, is something that is really could be a real positive. You played in the UK, you know what going from the Championship or Division 1 as it was into Division 2 into Division 1, it's the biggest game in football. You know, you tell me that nobody in the UK gets excited about the playoffs. It's unbelievable, you know, and that feeling of whether you're a supporter of one of those teams that makes the playoffs, and then you go through all that. You've played your season, you worked your heart off for the season, and then you get to the playoffs, and you get to the final. You've got one game. Granted, it's the biggest. I think it's the biggest pound note or dollar figure in world football. But you know, that's how important football is in that part of the world, and you can see how much it means to people. That would be fantastic here in Australia, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I think that we're all about we want our national teams to do well. So for our national teams, and I'm talking about Socceroos, midfielders, Olyroos, and the rest, that to actually start to compete on the world stage and do really well. Now, for that to happen, we need to start producing better players, and players that can go over to Europe and the UK and actually deal with the pressures of that. Now, at the moment, we've got a league. Don't get relegated. It doesn't matter if you finish bottom. You more than likely you're going to get another opportunity, either the club that you ended up finishing bottom with, or another club, because it's just like a merry-go-round at the moment with players. And if you do have a promotion relegation, it's actually hardening players up ready for when they do go overseas, because eventually we want them to go play at the highest level possible. Now, at the moment, we've only got 2 players in the Premier League. And so we're not producing those sort of players. Now, I remember, not only the promotion side of things, where you're saying it's a big game of the season that everyone follows, there's so much money involved. I remember playing in relegation battles, and they are hard. Because there's so much on the line, not only for the players, the club, but the actual city that you're playing in, and because there's so much that they can lose. Do go down. So, having that, it also creates a passion, and it creates, people wanting to go to that game because it's something important. So if we can create that here and not just allow it to go along as it's going along and try and create a passion for the game again, I think that will be a massive, massive boost for us.
John, in my hand, I've got a copy of what the PFA produced last year, report, Culture Amplifies Talent, and it said building a framework for the golden generations. We hear that word a lot at the moment, culture. Josip Skoko, who was one of those members of the roundtable Zoom conference on Optus Sport, has also said in an article that's just been published today by Optus Sport, where he's saying culture is such a thing that needs to be emphasised. We had Sheldon Carson, another generation, a few weeks back on Football Out West, saying pretty much the same thing. And he went so fast as to say that when he went to Europe, he was faced with a real dog-eat-dog environment. I think that's the word he used, Craig.
Yep.
You've been there, John. You've experienced that. Is that maybe that one element right at the top, at the elite level, that's missing from our game? Not talking about the grassroots, the community level, but the elite, a real dog-eat-dog, no holds barred type of a culture. Is that what's missing in Australian football?
Just before you answer that, John, and sorry to butt in there, guys. Just I've made a note here of the players that John talked about, players going abroad and making sure that they're capable of playing in those environments, as John said, where he played in relegation. You just go through some of the list here: Schwarzer, Robbie Slater, John himself, Viduka, Kewell, Bosnich, Lucas Neal, Lazaridis, Moore, Emerton, Cahill, Jedinek. They've all been brought up in that, what I class as that golden era of football. We've got two players. Australia have two players now playing in the Premier League. I've just named off 12 or 13 there that were top players playing in the top league, one of the top leagues in Europe, at a real tough time in football.
Yeah, look, we can go on. The list will probably be larger if I'm going. What we did have back then, we had players that were mentally strong and physically very strong and technically pretty good. I think now, technically, because of the coaching, and I believe it is getting a lot better in Australia, technically we're producing pretty good players that physically we've dropped off and mentally we've dropped off because they're not mentally hardened, and that's what you're getting at. And it was, and I can say, Spider Galaxy, dog is dog, it was ruthless over there. I remember my first every time I went over to Belgium on trial for 2 weeks, not one of the players spoke to me until I signed. And when I signed, they started to speak a little bit to me, and then eventually, you make your way in. But they would treat you like crap, and you had to get through it. There was no other way. You had to make sure, and these were your own teammates, let alone opposition players. But then, you got your issues with clubs sometimes, and I'm not agreeing with it, but not paying, on time and all these things. They're things that you have to get through to actually get to the top. All of the players that you mentioned have got stories upon stories of hardships they had to deal with to get to the top level. But that's what actually made us strong, because we had to go through it. We went through it. And then when, the pressure cooker came along in terms of playing in big games, and, a World Cup game or whatever, we were used to it. So we weren't afraid of anything. And that's just through experiences.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot to blame for that now, John. And we can't just go around and say that it's the coaching and it's the philosophy or it's the whatever that looks like. I think parents of certainly of my age are really important in how we've brought up kids over the last 10 or 15 years. Kids don't have to do anything now. Mum and dad will do everything for them. And from my time back playing football, my mum and dad would run everywhere for me, but they'd make me work for it. Whereas now I think, the mindset of people are far weaker. I do some one-on-one coaches with some players. And I have to say, some of their mindset and willingness to put in the hard yards is terrible, but they want to play at the highest level. And I'm saying, kids, you got no chance. You haven't got that hardened, attitude to. You have to work extremely hard to be the very best you can. You don't see Ronaldo and Messi giving up when they were 30 because they played some. Look at Ronaldo now. Look at the shape on him for a 36-year-old, still playing at the highest level. That takes dedication. That takes ambition. That takes the will and the want. And I think we've, unfortunately, as parents, and I'll put myself in that category where, we've just given kids everything. They don't move out of their bedrooms now. They're playing on their PS4s, whereas we used to be out in the road with jumpers as goalposts, as we used to call it, playing in mud, playing on streets, playing in car parks, and we'd move out the way if a car came and then get back onto playing football again. That's all stopped. Yeah,
look, I understand that, and I get it. There's also the schooling now, there's a certain way of actually teaching kids and bringing up kids, and parents, I won't go away from it. I actually was pretty spoiled as a kid as well in terms of, compared to my parents. But what I did have and what the majority of those players had, they had a real passion for the game. I grew up with playing all my juniors at Adelaide City, and my dream was to play for Adelaide City with that first team. So my passion and desire to play there, and then once I sort of got close, it was more, I wanted to play in the best leagues in Europe. So all the knockdowns and everything was not going to actually stop me from actually going and trying my best and working hard enough to get to the top, because my passion. Now, I think create that passion, and we talk about just saying culture and create that culture. I think even the way that parents are bringing up their kids, you know, the players will get through it because they, you know, I hadn't lived away from home before I went overseas, and you know, a little bit at the AIS, but that was a lot closer. And all of a sudden, I'm in a foreign country in a French-speaking place that my English wasn't that good, let alone my French. And all of a sudden, that you're having to deal with issues that you've never dealt with. But because I wanted to play overseas and at that level, you dealt with it. So if we can create that passion and that hunger back again, I think that will help us produce more players.
John, the biggest issue, I guess, now is we simply want to get back out on the field. Doesn't matter if it's in the A-League stadiums, the NPL grounds, or down at community level. So the sooner this coronavirus crisis finishes, the better. On the other side of this, will football change? Let's look into the crystal ball in your eyes. Will football change, and how will it change?
Yeah, it's a good question. It has to change here in Australia, that's for sure. We're discussing and we're debating. We want to be better, and we want the game to grow to the potential that it can. And look, we discussed it earlier that no one likes you know, not watching football, not being able to play football. You know, a sport that we love and we've run all our lives. To actually try and help it and get better. So you look at this negative time at the moment as an opportunity for us. In terms of European football, it will change. Now, it's how? I don't know. You know, is the sort of money that's been going around still going to be there? I'm unsure, but because I know this is going to hit financially a lot of different companies and different sports. But in terms of developing players over in Europe and the rest of the world, they'll still develop players. They'll still have their league. They'll still be, you know, playing at the highest level. That's why we can't sit on our heels and get left behind.
If there was one thing, John, that we need to change, just one thing that we need to change here in Australia, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question.
I have put you on the spot now.
There's many things that we need to change, and I know that it's a really hard one because, you know, what's the most important thing at the moment that we need to change? And I think that the A-League is the most important thing. We know we need to produce players. We know that we need to get grassroots back at a level. We know that our talent ID needs to be better. But and we probably, you know, it's a sport that we need to grow from the bottom up. But I think if we get this A-League right, this will help all the other things that we've been discussing. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in the transfer system locally, because that would not only help the clubs at the top, but also, you know, go down to the clubs in the NPL and help them. I think financially that will help. And, you know, I'm all for opening the salary cap. I know quite a few people are against that. But, you know, why hinder, you know, clubs that want to keep on growing? You know, why put a limit on that? You know, we don't have to follow the other sports because, you know, that they got a salary cap. We're an international sport. You know, ANZAC probably came out recently and said about the salary cap. So, you know, I think that there's two major things that we can actually affect straight away in doing that. Now, you know, clubs will realise how much they can spend or can't spend. So it doesn't mean that they're going to overspend when the salary cap's on. You know, they'll realise, and bringing financial fair play, the likes of the City Group won't be able to go and spend, you know, huge amounts of money compared to the rest. You'll still be, you know, quite level, and the clubs that have do a good job and are financially stable will be able to spend more money. Yes, that's the way it should be. So I think there's two things that we could actually accept straight away.
Fantastic, John. I really appreciate your time today. One last question before you do go. You mentioned Chris Kalantzis in the old NSL, and a question for you on a personal level. who had the best abs in the old NSL? Was it John Aloisi, Chris Kalantzis, or John Markovski?
You mean the young John Markovski?
Yeah.
It was the older John Markovski, and it wasn't. But I can tell you now, out of the left footers that you just, the players you mentioned, the best left foot was John Markovski.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
I remember watching him play. I was very young at that stage. He was back down in Adelaide. He was playing for Sunshine George Cross, and he hit a ball from I reckon it was about 40 metres out, and it hit the crossbar, and the first came back over his head. That's how hard he hit it. I'd never seen someone hit a ball so hard in my life. It was, he was only 15 at that stage. So yeah, John Markovski's left foot, what a wand that was.
Yeah, now you mentioned that we did speak with Caroline Springs George Cross, formerly known as Sunshine George Cross, one of our major sponsors. And just last week we had their president, Mark Sultana, on the show telling us how the old Chaplain Reserve is being demolished as we speak, I suppose. And him, Paul Trimboli, these are other kids that were 16, 15, 16 at the time, getting a taste of senior football in the old NSL. We'd love to see that happening in the A-League, and I'm sure we will see that in the not too distant future. Then we'll see some exciting youngsters coming up through the ranks. John, once again, thank you very much for your time and wishing you all the very best with your endeavours at Optus Sport, who knows, may be a big player on the Australian football broadcasting scene in the not too distant future.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Good on you. That was John Aloisi, member of the Golden Generation, and former Socceroo great who is still actively involved in the sport. Fantastic interview, wasn't it, Craig?
Great interview. It's unfortunate we couldn't get him on the show live due to the situation with Optus Sports, but as a viewer, but great insight into his thoughts around development and what needs to change. And again, it's I spoke about it last week. If you still haven't had the opportunity to watch the Optus Sports show with the 6 ex-pros, it's definitely worth a watch. It's an hour and 50 minutes, and it is unbelievable TV. And it just shows, I suppose, what can happen when you get a number of people with the same thoughts around what needs to happen, of what actually changes. And we only look at, that show off the back of that, of what's happened with the starting 11. And I was under the impression last night that the Socceroos, the old Socceroos, which John touched on there, were on a conference call last evening. So it'll be interesting to see what they've come up with over the last 24 hours and a week that's going to make a difference. And let's hope they can.
Absolutely. Now, don't go away. You're on the Football Out West show. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we've got more for you. So stay tuned.